So today we're going to talk about the contemporary health impacts of the protection through segregation and assimilation policy on Australia First peoples. So first, the protection through segregation era is between 1890 and 1950. So after the colonization, indigenous people were moved onto reserves or missions. State and territory laws were put in place to control relations between indigenous people, and then under these laws, protection boards and Native Affairs departments segregated and controlled a large part of the indigenous people's population. The assimilation era between 1950 and 1960. So in 1973, the Commonwealth government held a national conference on Indigenous Affairs where they agreed that Indigenous people not of full blood should be assimilated into the wider populated areas. The aim of assimilation was to make the Aboriginal problem gradually disappear so that Indigenous people would lose their identity in the wider community and act like a white fella. So then we talk about the impact of the policies on contemporary health and life system, and how to build trustful and respectful relationship with First People and health professionals. Instruction on the first settlement had been to maintain peaceful and friendly relations with the native inhabitants. However, the reality was very different. Almost from the beginning of colonization, Aboriginal population were devastated by introduced disease and the loss of land and livelihood, and little was done to provide medical aid. It was not until 1837 that the policy of protection was enacted after decades of frontier violence. Under the protection policies, which remained in place throughout the next century, protectors were appointed, reserves were established, and Aboriginal population was segregated on mission and government settlement. Throughout this era, the prevailing attitude was that Indigenous people were inferior to non-Indigenous people. And legislation to further separate mixed race people and empower protectors to remove children from the family was progressive pace in the states. They also appointed protectors of Aborigines who controlled the lives of Aboriginal people as they were displaced from their homeland and segregated by being moved to missions, stations, and reserves. They were made to conform to the white European standards of behavior and belief.
So another impact of the Aboriginal people with their health and well-being was the assimilation policy, which was created by the Australian government between 1950 to the 1960s. The policy of assimilation described as a forced removal of Indigenous children from their families and absorbing them into the white society.
I'm now going to speak about the direct impacts on health that both protection through segregation and assimilation had on Aboriginal peoples. So, firstly, we've got here that Aboriginal people started to lose their identity, their culture, and tradition, that there was poverty and racism, which led to the downward spiral of the loss of self love and a sense of belonging. There was decline in health due to poor living conditions and an overcrowding of the missions. And this led to an increase in new diseases and the transmission of these. And lastly, we've got that there were feelings of anger and feelings of powerlessness, which just exacerbated, I suppose, all of these points as their land and their community was taken off of them. And on the right here, we've got the medicine wheel, which we've incorporated into this because I thought it was a really nice view on the holistic approach that Aboriginal people take to health and well-being, which, as you can see, are mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical. We're now going to look at the policy's impact on contemporary health. So looking at the effects that these policies had on Aboriginal people these days, which include decreased health outcomes still, including obesity, increased health expenses, a decrease in life expectancy, in introduction of new diseases, alcohol and drug abuse. We're still finding a loss of culture and identity, which lead to things like depression, denial, suicide, a lack of social connection, psychological and emotional grief, and trauma. A study that was found in 2017, it was published, and it was named The Impact of Indigenous Cultural Identity and Cultural Engagement on Violent Offending. And this showed that Indigenous people with a strong cultural identity were less likely to be associated with criminal activity in comparison to those who didn't have a strong cultural identity. And this suggested that a positive cultural identity can provide someone with a sense of purpose, belonging, and social support. This process may occur through an attachment to a cultural group whereby belief systems, values, obligations, and practices are shared and reinforced by in-group members. The potential health benefits of sustaining a strong cultural identity and or participating in cultural activities has been documented in prior research with Indigenous and other non-white samples in Western settings. For example, possessing a strong cultural identity has been found to promote resilience, enhance self-esteem, engender pro-social coping styles, and has served as protective mechanisms against mental health symptoms. Moreover, cultural identity may buffer discrimination, induce stress. Sustaining a strong cultural identity is a key component of social and emotional well-being, an Indigenous Australian framework of health. Here, an identity can be cultivated and maintained through participating in cultural events and developing a connection to family, community, and traditional lands. The strengthening of culture serves to build resilience and positive coping mechanisms, facilitating life, balance, and protecting against adverse life experiences, which include the impact of history in trauma and loss. This includes the fostering of effective responses to stigma and discrimination and the ongoing impacts of colonisation. Identifying and engaging in Indigenous cultures has been linked with enhanced self-assessed health, improved educational and employment outcomes, and a greater life satisfaction.
So now we're going to take a look at how these policies have impacted on building trustful and respectful relationships between First People and health professionals. In building trustful and respectful relationships with First People as health professionals, it is important to understand the existing barriers, both physical and mental, that still exist in society today. Many Indigenous elders refuse to leave their land for fear of not returning. Further, reluctance to visit health professionals in the onset of disease means patients present further along in the process of the disease, often meaning more complex treatments are required. Initiatives have been set up and continue to be set up to change attitudes and help Aboriginal Australians become more inclined to visit their local health professional, and some of these include Closing the Gap and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Plan. So now, as we move along, we look at some of the programs that have been put in place to assist in building relationships between First People and health professionals. Some of these include a comprehensive primary healthcare model providing a collective effort to achieve and maintain the cultural well-being of the local Aboriginal community. This is achieved through a holistic approach that incorporates body, mind, spirit, land, environment, custom, and socio-economic status without dismissing the impacts of social determinants. This is an effort to reduce access barriers to health services, ensuring they are physically accessible and safe to reach for all populations. Further, initiatives such as Closing the Gap has been designed to close life expectancy differences between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations, whilst Share the Pride incorporates genuine engagements with communities in developing and implementing policies. Decisions and leadership is led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that knits together local knowledge within a national framework. As we conclude, moving forwards, it is important for us as future health professionals to know and understand the harsh history of Aboriginal people and the significant grief and trauma they are still present with today. Ensuring the provision of health services is provided with equality across all population groups, with an eagerness to understand and appreciate the tradition and culture of Aboriginal practices. Providing this basic level of respect will assist in understanding the holistic approach that Aboriginals take to health, which includes mental, spiritual, physical and emotional factors. Overall, taking this all into consideration will assist us, health professionals, as treatments and their outcomes may be affected by this knowledge.